Hey iPrevent viewers, happy Pride Month! For those of you that don't know, Pride is the celebration of LGBTQ plus identities and their fight against violence and discrimination. We celebrate Pride Month in June in commemoration of the Stonewall Uprising, which we're going to be talking about a little later in the video. Today, we're also going to be discussing LGBTQ plus identities, health, and health disparities that the LGBTQ community faces.
Before we start, let's define some terminology that is commonly used to describe sexual and gender identities. Knowledge of these terms is very important in supporting the LGBTQIA+ community to feel seen and heard. LGBTQIA+ stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex, and allies. The plus signifies that this term does not encompass all identities that people may have. Gender identity is how a person perceives themselves and what they call themselves. Sexual orientation is a person's identity in relation to the gender or genders to which they are sexually attracted. Bisexual or pansexual is a person who is romantically, emotionally, or sexually attracted to people of their own gender as well as the other gender or genders. Cisgender is a person whose gender identity aligns with the sex assigned to them at birth. Gay is a person who is romantically, emotionally, or sexually attracted to people of the same gender. This term is used by men, women, and non-binary people. Asexual is a person who does not have sexual attraction to other people. Intersex describes a person who is born with reproductive or sexual anatomy that cannot be classified as typically male or female. And queer is an umbrella term that people who are not heterosexual or cisgender use to describe themselves. The term used to be a slur, but it has now been reclaimed by the LGBTQIA+ movement.
Although most historians agree that there's evidence of same-sex marriage in every culture, the LGBTQ plus community has faced incredible discrimination in the United States in the 20th and 21st centuries. It was just as recent as 1953 that President Eisenhower signed an executive order that said that LGBTQ plus individuals could not serve in the federal government, claiming they were a security risk. And since then, the violence and discrimination against the community has only continued. There have since been laws passed and some revoked that limit the rights of LGBTQ plus Americans. It wasn't until 2015, just 6 years ago, that the Supreme Court legalized gay marriage. More recently, in 2018, President Trump and his administration banned most transgender individuals from serving in the military, though this law has since been repealed by President Biden. So, gay and queer Americans have faced and continue to face discrimination in the eyes of the law. But what about in the eyes of the public? According to a survey conducted in 2020, 1 in 3 LGBTQ plus Americans faced discrimination in the past year. Whether this be at work or at school or in their personal lives, these people are still being mistreated. This number increases among transgender people, 62% of whom experienced discrimination in the last year. The survey also found that 52% of respondents reported that discrimination had impacted their psychological well-being.
One of the most brutal acts of violence and discrimination against the LGBTQ plus community occurred in June of 1969 in New York City. Police raided a popular gay club called the Stonewall Inn and arrested employees and individuals who were proven to be cross-dressing or dressing like the gender they were not born as, which was illegal at the time. Rather than dispersing like they normally would, angry patrons hung around outside the bar and became more and more upset while watching the aggressive acts of the police. A riot then began, involving hundreds of people, causing the police to barricade themselves inside the bar, and eventually the bar was set on fire. Once reinforcements arrived, the fire was put out, but riots at the Stonewall Inn raged on and off for the next 5 days. One key activist involved with the uprising at Stonewall was Martha P. Johnson, a Black transgender woman who was on the front lines of the LGBTQ movement in the 1960s. Martha was one of the founders of STAR, Street Transgender Action Revolutionaries, an organization that housed and fed transgender youth. She is widely credited with throwing the first brick at Stonewall that sparked the uprising that followed for days after. The events at Stonewall have since become known as the Stonewall Uprising, a symbol of resistance to political and social discrimination that the LGBTQ+ community has faced and continues to face. Although these riots are not credited with the start of the gay rights movement, they did spark a new generation of political activism.
So let's switch gears a little bit and talk about health disparities. What are health disparities? Health disparities are differences in healthcare and health outcomes for different groups. The LGBTQ+ community has greater risks that negatively impact their health outcomes due to stigma and discrimination. They're at greater risk of suicide, mood disorders, eating disorders, and alcohol, tobacco, and substance use.
According to the CDC, LGBTQ+ youth are at greater risk of certain diseases and other health outcomes. Gay and bisexual males have higher rates of HIV, syphilis, and other STDs than their heterosexual peers. Young lesbian and bisexual females are more likely to have experienced pregnancy than their heterosexual peers. Transgender youth are more likely to have committed suicide than their cisgender peers. Not only are there physical disparities, but there are also mental health disparities that negatively affect the LGBTQ+ community. LGBTQ+ people have higher rates of depression and anxiety. Because of the stigma and discrimination that LGBTQ people face, it's often difficult for LGBTQ+ youth to grow up being themselves. This can lead to gender dysphoria, which is the experience of feeling distressed when one's gender identity does not align with one's sex assigned at birth. This can especially occur to a young LGBTQ person whose family or friends are not accepting of who they are.
The LGBTQ+ community has lower access to care due to stigma and discrimination. They are less likely to have health insurance, more likely to be refused health services, and more likely to delay a trip to the hospital or clinic due to harassment. Lack of access to health care leads to difficulties in preventing and treating illness. We must work to close the gaps in health services to LGBTQ+ community members by educating ourselves and others, increasing awareness, and refusing to accept irrational hate and violence. Thanks for listening, iPrevent viewers. We hope you learned some important lessons today and can take and use this knowledge to live more supportive, open, and healthy lives. As we celebrate Pride, let's remember those who came before us to fight for the rights of LGBTQ+ individuals and move forward with compassion and advocacy to ensure the safety and well-being for all LGBTQ+ people.
If you are part of the LGBTQ+ community living in New Orleans and looking for resources, Lambda House hosts various 12-step program meetings like Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous for the LGBTQ+ community. And Crescent Care offers LGBTQ+ health and wellness services, including primary care, hormone administration, HIV and STD testing, and more. You can call 504-821-2601 for more info or to schedule a visit with them. As always, iPrevent is here for your health needs. Call us at 504-418-4955 for free condoms, lube, HIV and Hep C testing, Medicaid enrollment, and more. Thank you and see you next time.